In the meantime, we're focusing tonight on the environment and what Governor Tina Kotek has planned for the future of Oregon. That is our big story tonight. Kale Williams and Governor Kotek had a nice chat in Salem. They had a lot to talk about. From the state's signature climate program to housing to transportation, Kale covered it all. There's so much, we're actually showing you just part one tonight and then part two tomorrow night. So let's get started.
Well, Governor Kotek, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about the environment with me today. My first question is kind of general. What is at the top of your environmental priority list?
Well, the top issue for me is making sure we can meet our climate reduction goals.
And that got a little harder recently. The state's signature climate policy, the Climate Protection Program, put a cap on greenhouse gas emissions from major polluters that gradually lowers over time. The goal was to cut emissions by 90% by 2050. But late last year, an appeals court ruled the whole program was invalid. And that's because the Department of Environmental Quality failed to follow some administrative rules while crafting the program. The process to get the program back up and running started again just this week, with the goal of having it re-implemented by next year. So I asked Kotek, given that it's her top priority, if she was worried about all that lost time.
Yeah, it's certainly not ideal when there's been a lot of work to put in to develop those rules for the Climate Protection Program that the court said, hey, you didn't quite do it right, so they're restarting. But the substance wasn't challenged in that court ruling. So we want to make sure that everyone's at the table, being transparent about the rulemaking, but continue to move forward, because it is a key piece to make sure we can reduce our reliance on fossil fuels.
The Climate Protection Program is just one way Kotek is hoping to stem the effects of climate change. Buildings in Oregon are responsible for a lot of greenhouse gases, mostly from burning fossil fuels to heat them and run appliances. Early in her term, Kotek pledged to build more than 30,000 units of new housing per year. The legislature passed a housing package in the last session that puts more than $375 million toward that goal.
And how do you plan to ensure that climate resilience, efficiency, electrification will be incorporated into all this new construction?
Those are really good questions. Well, and I think everyone understands the need for housing from their own personal perspective.
Now, the state already has programs that provide incentives for upgrades on appliances in older homes. And Kotek said she tried to get funding for a similar program for new construction, but it didn't end up in the final package.
Because these are homes that are going to be there for many decades in the future. Can they also be responsive to our needs around climate? And I think we can do that. We have some good programs in place. We just need to do more of it.
Gotcha. Are you going to be looking for funding to get that fully funded?
Oh, absolutely.
Beyond what goes in new homes, Kotek said we need to think carefully about where we build them.
But if you think about housing and having it available in a way that reduces transportation needs, that's a climate issue. Making it easier for people to live closer to where they live and work and have their kids go to school is a climate issue.
Now, buildings are the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases, but the transportation sector, that's at the top of the list. And the 2025 legislative session is likely to feature robust debate over a major transportation package.
What are you going to be looking for in the next transportation package that will ensure that our transportation sector plays its role in meeting our climate goals?
And it has to. ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation, does have a climate action plan. We need to follow that as best we can. One of the good things that came out of the last transportation package were some really key investments. One was a statewide payroll tax that is now supporting transit across the state, not just in larger populated areas, but across the state.
Beyond more funding for public transit, Kotek said she wanted to see more incentives to get people into electric vehicles. The state has an EV rebate program, but the first time it was offered, the money ran out quickly.
Do you think that there's going to be a time when the rebate fund for EVs is not going to be something that runs out periodically?
I would like some consistency there. I mean, if you're out there, if you think that program's not available, you're going to make different choices. I would like to get to a point where we have consistency with that program. I've been frustrated that we've had this up and down, open, close. We need to have more consistency for folks.
The growing popularity of electric vehicles is going to have ripple effects, though. Funding for road operations and maintenance has traditionally come from the gas tax. Kotek hinted that folks with EVs are going to be asked to pony up in the coming years.
We want people in cleaner vehicles, and they still need roads, right? So we have to talk about the gas tax, at least in the near term, is still going to be a source of funding for operation and maintenance on our roads. But what is the appropriate way for folks who are driving electric vehicles? What should they be doing differently? So we want to have that conversation, potentially on road user fees, to make sure that everyone is supporting the infrastructure we all need.
Now, heading into this interview, I reached out to a bunch of groups to ask about their environmental concerns. One thing I heard repeatedly, even from those who supported Kotek in the last election, were concerns about changes to land use laws included in the recent housing package. The changes would allow some limited development outside of Oregon's urban growth boundaries.
I've talked to some environmental advocates recently. I polled a bunch of people asking what I should ask in this conversation. A lot of them supported you in the last election. We're very happy to do so, and are now feeling a little disappointed in what they see as weakening of land use laws and other environmental protections. What would you say to a voter who might be having second thoughts about your environmental record?
And again, my focus in my first year has been, let's look at the things that are on the books. We've done some really bold, amazing things here in Oregon. Can we continue to do them? Can we execute on the goals that we have? As it relates to the land use law and our housing protection bill, I know there was some frustration there, but I also want to say thank you to the environmental communities who came together with us and said, how do we do this as responsibly as possible? Housing has to get built. I believe we can build more housing but not destroy our land use system. And so what you saw in the bill that eventually passed was clear goals around affordability, clear goals when a community could use an expanded urban growth boundary tool. Not every community is going to do it. I think it's a responsible way to address some of our land supply issues by maintaining the values of our land use system. And I continue to work with our environmental community. They're watching, I'm watching. We want to do it right. Building more homes just willy-nilly is not the right way to do it. We're doing it responsibly and strategically.
Kale's with me now. Super interesting as always. And I noticed the governor kind of fudged her answer on the EV rebate program.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting program. You know, this gives people up to $7,500 back on the purchase of a new or used electric vehicle.
So big deal.
Yeah, they had this program in 2023, ran out of money in about 4 months. And so everybody who bought an EV after that got put on a waiting list. And a lot of them are still waiting to get that money. This year, they say it's going to be open from, just a couple days ago up through June 3rd or until the money runs out. And those people will again be put on a waiting list. And as the governor said, if you think that there's not a rebate coming, it's probably going to change how you're making that big purchasing decision.
Yeah, and I think you were asking her, how are you going to keep this money coming in consistently? And she didn't really have an answer on that.
Not quite.
All right, let's go to cap and trade. That is a big deal starting up again, huh?
Yeah, so I mean, this program was invalidated just a few months ago, and they are in the process of doing this whole rulemaking process again. And I actually listened in on their first rulemaking committee meeting earlier this week. I think it was Tuesday. And there was talk about whether the program will be exactly the same or whether it's going to change. And they have left open the opportunity to make tweaks, which could include a more aggressive trajectory on lowering those emissions to make up for some of this time that they've lost.
Wow, that will be fascinating. And that this is going to progress over a series of weeks and months, I guess?
Yeah, the rulemaking committee, they have 2 more meetings, and then there'll be a public comment period. It'll eventually go to the Environmental Quality Commission, who needs to approve of it. They're hoping to implement it by next year.
And the whole program here is to push down on all the carbon monoxide that's going out into the atmosphere?
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide, all right, by making it more expensive and people, it's gonna be a whole market and...
Yeah, they can trade these credits, and so eventually, hopefully, we bring carbon dioxide emissions down by 90% by 2050. That's the goal.
That's a great dream. All right, thanks, Kale. Good stuff as always.
Sure.
And that's just the first half of Kale's interview with the governor. He'll be back tomorrow night with part 2, talking about some of the thornier environmental issues in the state. He'll cover the development of the floating offshore wind power along the state's southern coast and changes coming to how timber is harvested in the Oregon State forests. Again, that's tomorrow night, right here on The Story.